The rain over Lecky did not fall, it attacked. It lashed against the reinforced glass of the Sterling mansion like 1,000 tiny hammers, trying to break through to the secrets within. Faith stood by the window, the photograph of Amara clutched so tightly in her hand that the edges were beginning to white. In the reflection of the glass, she saw her own silhouette, the silhouette of a woman who had risen from the red dust of Abia to the heights of Lagos high society. She was a billionaire's wife. She was a fashion mogul. She was a mother-to-be. But in this light, under the shadow of this new threat, she felt like that 22-year-old girl again, standing in a leaking shack in Ajagunal, waiting for a storm to take her away. Ethan was in his study. She could hear the low, frantic rumble of his voice as he spoke to the forensic auditors. The empire was bleeding. Every headline was a new wound. But Faith wasn't looking at the stock prices. She was looking at the woman in the photo. Amara Okoye, the woman who had survived the fire that killed Ethan's brother, looked like a prisoner in a gilded cage. Ask Sarah why she waited so long. Faith whispered to the empty room. The question was a poison. If Sarah had the evidence Elijah gathered, the ledger, the recordings, the proof of a systemic rot, why had she allowed Ethan to suffer for a decade? Why had she waited until they were at their happiest? Until Faith was pregnant? Until the Sterling brand was a global powerhouse? A cold realization settled in Faith's chest. Sarah didn't want justice. Sarah wanted a harvest. Justice is sought when the wound is fresh. A harvest is taken when the fruit is ripe. Ethan walked into the room, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his face a map of exhaustion. He saw the photo in her hand. Musa is tracking the location where that photo was taken, Ethan said, his voice grating with fatigue. He thinks it's a private villa in Ape, Sarah's family land. Ethan. Faith turned, her eyes burning with a sudden, sharp clarity. We have to stop following her lead. Every time she drops a crumb, we run to pick it up. The Enugu house, the flash drive, the archive. She's not helping us find the truth. She's leading us into a trap she's been building for 10 years. Ethan stepped toward her, his hands reaching for hers. I know. But Elijah's voice on that recording, he said the family was the problem. If my father knew about the fraud, if the warehouse was burned to protect the Sterling name, then I am living on a foundation of blood, Faith. I can't build a future for our child on a lie. Faith looked at their joined hands. Elijah didn't say your father did it. He said do not assume the family is outside the problem. There is a difference. She pulled the photo of Amara Okoye up. Amara said she saw you outside the building. But the payment note she had was signed 3 days before the fire. Someone was using your name before you even had power. They weren't just covering up a scandal, Ethan. They were grooming a scapegoat. Before Ethan could respond, the lights in the mansion flickered once, twice, and then plunged into total darkness. The hum of the air conditioners died. The security monitors in the hallway went black. In the sudden, suffocating silence, the only sound was the rain, and then a new sound. The heavy, rhythmic thud of the mansion's emergency gates being forced open. Stay behind me, Ethan hissed, his voice dropping into the cold, survivalist tone of the man who had survived the docks of Ajagunal. But Faith didn't feel like a victim. She felt a surge of protective rage. This was her home. This was her peace. And someone was trying to burn it down again. The backup generators kicked in 30 seconds later, bathing the house in an eerie, dim red light. Moose's voice crackled over Ethan's phone. Boss, the perimeter has been breached. They cut the main lines from the street. It's not a robbery. They're looking for the archive. The archive is in the safe, Ethan shouted into the phone. No, Faith said, her heart stopping. The archive isn't what they want. They want the woman who can read it. She realized then that Sarah's message wasn't just a hint. It was a distraction. While they were busy questioning Sarah's motives, the people Sarah was working for were moving to silence the only witness who remained, Amara Okoye. "Ethan, they aren't here for us," Faith said, grabbing his arm. "Musa said the photo of Amara was taken in Ape, but Amara told me she was in a convalescent home in Suralere. If she's in Ape now, it means Sarah moved her. We need to get to Suralere. There's something there she didn't tell me." "It's too dangerous," Ethan argued. "The danger is staying here and doing nothing while they move the pieces." Faith countered. They didn't wait for the security team. Ethan took the keys to the camouflage prototype car, the one that didn't have a GPS tracker registered to the company. They slipped out through the service tunnel as the shadows of men in tactical gear moved across the lawn. The drive to Suralere was a nightmare of flooded roads and lightning. Lagos felt like an ocean. Faith sat in the passenger seat, her laptop open on her lap, hacking into the old accounting software Amara had mentioned. "I found it," Faith said, her voice trembling. Amara wasn't just an accountant. She was the one who flagged the ghost inventory. "Ethan, the warehouse didn't just ship empty crates. They were shipping high-end textiles that didn't exist on the company books. They were using Sterling Global's logistics to move stolen goods for a third party." "Who?" Ethan asked, swerving to avoid a stalled bus. "A company called Verve Holdings," Faith read. "The CEO isn't listed, but the primary shareholder is a trust fund based in Enugu. The same trust fund that pays for Sarah's lifestyle."
They arrived at the convalescent home in Suralere. It was a crumbling colonial building, hidden behind a high wall of overgrown bougainvillea. The gates were swinging open in the wind. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and damp rot. The nurse's station was empty. Faith led the way to room 7. The door was ajar. The room was empty. The bed was neatly made, but on the small nightstand sat a single item, an old, rusted sewing machine needle. Faith picked it up, her eyes filled with tears. "This is for my mother," she whispered. "My mother used to mark her needles with a specific notch, so she could find them in the dark. Amara didn't just work with Elijah. She was being protected by my mother." Faith turned the needle over. Underneath the base, a tiny microdot was glued. "She left this for me," Faith said. "She knew I would come back." Ethan took the needle, his face hardening. "Your mother wasn't just a worker at that warehouse. She was an architect's worst nightmare. And I think I know who the architect is." He looked at Faith, his eyes filled with a terrifying grief. "Elijah didn't die because he found the fraud. He died because he found out that our father wasn't the leader of the system. He was the victim of it. My father was being blackmailed by Julian Thorne's other family." The screen of the story shifts to a grainy, sepia-tone memory. It is June 2014. The air is thick with the scent of impending rain. A younger Elijah Sterling stands in the shadows of the Icordu warehouse. He looks like Ethan, but his eyes are softer, more prone to believing in the goodness of people. He is holding a ledger. Beside him is a woman. She is beautiful, with dark hair and a smile that feels like a promise. This is Sarah, before the silver hair, before the dark glasses. She is holding his hand. "Elijah, we should just take the files to the police," Sarah whispers. "If your father finds out you're digging into Vesper Holdings, he'll disinherit you. My father isn't the one I'm worried about." Elijah says, his voice steady. "It's Julian, Thorne. He's using our shipping lines to move more than just fabric. There are people in those crates. Sarah, illegal labor being moved to the mines in the north. I can't let the Sterling name be part of that." Sarah's smile falters for a second. "And what about us? Our future? Our future depends on the truth," Elijah says. He walks toward the manager's office. He doesn't see Sarah pull a burner phone from her bag. He doesn't see her type 3 words. He is everything. Later that night, The fire starts, not in the chemical storage, but in the office where Elijah is working. The doors are locked from the outside. Elijah screams. He beats against the reinforced glass. Through the smoke, he sees a silhouette. "Sarah," he gasps. "The key. Get the key." The silhouette doesn't move. She just watches. She watches until the ceiling collapses. She watches until the man she swore to love is buried in ash. The memory fades back to the present. Faith is staring at Ethan. She killed him. Faith says, her voice a ghost. Sarah didn't just survive the scandal. She was the one who ensured the scandal died with him. And now, Ethan said, she's using the same fire to burn us. She didn't wait 10 years because she was mourning. She waited 10 years because the trust fund was running dry. She needs the shares to pay back the people who helped her lock that door. They knew they couldn't go back to Lecky. They were being watched. They were being hunted. "We're going to Enugu," Ethan said. "The archive in the basement." Sarah showed us the boxes she wanted us to see, but the recording Elijah left said, "Do not assume the family is outside the problem." He wasn't talking about my father. He was talking about the house itself. The drive to Enugu was a blur of high-speed toll booths and silent prayers. Faith felt the baby kick, a sharp, rhythmic reminder that she wasn't just fighting for her past, but for a life that hadn't even begun. They arrived at the old Sterling family house at 2 a.m. It looked like a tomb. The dry fountain was filled with dead leaves. The portraits inside looked at them with judgmental eyes. Sarah was already there. She was sitting in the grand library, a glass of red wine in her hand, her silver hair glowing in the moonlight. She wasn't wearing her dark glasses. Her eyes were empty, cold, and utterly without remorse. "You're late," Sarah said, not looking up. "I expected you at midnight." "Where's Amara?" Faith demanded, stepping forward. Sarah finally looked at her. "Amara is where she belongs, in the care of people who understand the value of silence. On the other hand, Faith, you have a very loud soul. It's a pity. You could have been a very successful seamstress if you hadn't married into a war." "It wasn't a marriage," Ethan said, his voice a low vibration of rage. "It was a rescue, and I'm going to rescue my brother's memory from you." Sarah laughed. "Your brother was a fool, Ethan. He thought he could change the world with a ledger. I changed the world with a match." She stood up, smoothing her silk dress. "The board meeting is in 6 hours. If you aren't to sign over the shares, Amara Okoye dies. And your father, Faith, the real Mr. Benson, he'll never wake up from his convalescence." Faith felt the world tilt. "You have my father?" "Victoria was so easy to buy," Sarah smirked. "She didn't just want the money. She wanted you to suffer. She's been keeping your father drugged for months. One phone call from me, and the dosage becomes permanent." Faith felt the floor beneath her feet crack, not with fear, but with a cold, architectural precision. She was a builder. She knew how to find the weak point in a structure. "You think you've won because you have the pieces," Faith said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a shout. "But you forgot one thing about my mother, Sarah. She didn't just escape with a ledger. She escaped with the key." Faith walked to the portrait of Chief Nathan Sterling. She didn't look at the face. She looked at the background, the depiction of the Icordu warehouse. In the corner of the painting, hidden in the brushstrokes of the smoke, was a small, notched needle. Faith reached out and pressed the needle. The wall behind the library didn't just slide open, it groaned. A hidden staircase, narrower and darker than the one they had seen before, spiraled into the earth.
"Elijah didn't build an archive," Faith said. Looking back at a stunned Sarah, "He built a vault. And my mother was the only one who knew how to open it." Ethan and Faith descended into the dark, leaving Sarah screaming for them to stop. At the bottom of the stairs was a room lined with lead. It was cold, dry, and smelled of ozone. In the center of the room was a single high-tech server and a physical chest made of reinforced steel. Ethan opened the chest. Inside was not more ledgers. It was a collection of high-definition photographs. Faith gasped. The photos weren't of business deals. They were of Sarah. Sarah with Julian Thorne's brother. Sarah meeting with the very insurance investigators who had cleared Ethan. And at the bottom of the chest was a letter, handwritten by Mama Faith. To my daughter. If you are reading this, it means the fire has returned. I work for the Sterlings because I loved your father, and his business was destroyed by the same shadows. Elijah was a good man. He knew he wouldn't survive the night. He gave me these to keep you safe. The billions don't matter, Faith. The only thing that matters is that you never let them tell you who you are. Faith gripped the letter. She knew. My mother knew all along. Suddenly, the server in the room hummed to life. A screen flickered on. A voice filled the vault. It wasn't Elijah's voice. It was a voice from the present. Congratulations, Faith. You found the heart of the machine. Faith and Ethan spun around. On the screen was a live video feed of the Sterling mansion in Lekki. Chief Musa was on the floor, handcuffed, and standing over him was the woman from the silver car and ape. But she wasn't Sarah. She was Isabella, the woman Ethan thought had died in the fire. Isabella's face was a map of burned scars, her eyes filled with a madness that had been simmering for 10 years. Ethan, Isabella whispered through the speakers. You thought I was the victim. You thought Sarah was the villain. But Sarah was just my hands. I am the architect. I burned that warehouse to kill Elijah because he was going to expose me. I was the one running Vesper Holdings. I was the one using your family to build my throne. Ethan's face went white. Isabella? But I saw you. I tried to save you. You tried to save a ghost, Isabella spat. I was out the back door before the first alarm went off. I've spent 10 years watching you from the shadows. I watched you become a billionaire. I watched you find this village girl. I was going to let you live in your little dream until I realized you were going to have a child. A Sterling heir. Her voice turned into a hiss. There will be no more heirs. The fire is coming for the mansion, Ethan. And I have Amara and Mr. Benson here with me. If you want them to live, you will come to the 6 studio. Alone. No police. No security. Just you and the ledger. The screen went black. The drive back to Victoria Island was a blur of silence and impending doom. You can't go alone, Faith said, her voice breaking. I have to, Ethan said, his hand steady on the wheel. She has your father, Faith. She has Amar. She has Musa. If I don't go, she'll burn everything. Then I'm coming with you. No, you have the vault data. You have the photos. If I don't make it out, you go to the press. You save the name. You save our child. I am not saving a name without a man. Faith shouted. They arrived at the 6 studio. The building was dark, the glass windows reflecting the lightning. Ethan stopped the car. He turned to Faith and kissed her, a deep, desperate kiss that tasted of salt and the end of the world. I loved you when I had nothing, Faith. Remember that? He stepped out of the car and walked into the studio. Faith sat in the car, her heart pounding. She looked at the laptop. She looked at the vault data. The billions don't matter, her mother's voice echoed in her head. The only thing that matters is that you never let them tell you who you are. Faith realized then that she wasn't just a witness anymore. She was a builder. And a builder doesn't just watch a structure fall. She opened the car door. Inside the studio, the air was heavy with the smell of expensive silk and gasoline. Isabella stood in the center of the showroom, a flare gun in her hand. Ethan stood 10 feet away, holding the leather-bound ledger from the vault. In the background, tied to chairs, were Amara, Chief Musa, and a frail, drugged-looking man who could only be Faith's father. Give it to me, Ethan, Isabella said, her voice trembling with a terrifying joy. Give me the ledger, and I'll let the laborer go. The laborer has a name. A voice echoed from the doorway. Faith walked into the room. She wasn't carrying a weapon. She was carrying her phone, held high. I'm live streaming this to 4 million followers, Isabella, Faith said, her voice cold and precise. The police are 2 minutes away. The board members are watching. The world is seeing the architect of ashes. Isabella screamed, pointing the flare gun at Faith. You think I care about the world? I've lived in the dark for 10 years. I'll burn this whole city down before I let you have his name. You already lost a name, Faith said, stepping closer. Ignoring Ethan's frantic signal to stay back. Look at the mannequins, Isabella. Isabella looked around. For the first time, she noticed the gowns. They weren't slashed. They weren't ruined. They were the Red Dust Legacy collection. And they were glowing. I treated the silk with fire-retardant chemicals I developed for the prototype cars. Faith said, Go ahead, fire the flare. The only thing that will burn in here is you. Isabella let out a guttural cry and fired the flare. The red spark hit a mannequin draped in white silk. The fire flared for a second, then died. The fabric didn't catch.
In that moment of shock, Chief Musa broke his ties. He had been working on them since Ethan entered, and lunged for Isabella. The struggle was brief. The flare gun skittered across the floor. The sirens of the police became a deafening roar outside. 6 months later, the sun rose over the Lagos Lagoon, painting the water in shades of gold that no billionaire could buy. Faith stood on the balcony of the mansion. She was holding a bundle wrapped in the finest, softest silk she had ever created. Ethan walked out behind her, his face peaceful. He wrapped his arms around her and the baby. He looks like Elijah, Ethan whispered. He has your eyes, Faith said. The trial of Sarah and Isabella had gripped the nation. The Sterling name had been cleared, but the company was different now. It was no longer a machine of profit. It was a foundation of service. Faith's father, Mr. Benson, was recovering in a private clinic, the real one this time. He was sober, his eyes clear, and he spent his days telling the nurses stories about his daughter, the builder. But as the peace settled over the house, Faith looked down at the street. A black vintage limousine pulled up to the gates. A man stepped out. He was old, leaning on a silver-headed cane. He looked up at the balcony. Faith's breath hitched. She recognized the cane. It was the one from her mother's drawings. The one labeled the true owner. The man didn't look like a villain. He looked like a man who had been waiting for a century to come home. He looked directly at Faith and shouted, I am not here for the Sterling boy. I am here for my granddaughter. Tell the Sterlings they have been living in my house for long enough. Faith looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at the man. The 99.9% DNA match from the archive files flashed in Faith's mind. It hadn't been a match to Ethan's father. It had been a match to the man on the street. The real Julian Thorne. And the war for the empire was only just beginning. I cannot believe it. The real Julian Thorne is alive, and he says the Sterling mansion belongs to Faith? Is Faith the secret daughter of the man who co-founded the empire? Was Ethan's father the one who stole the legacy, or was Julian Thorne the shadow behind it all? And what does this mean for Faith's new baby? Comment, if you think Faith should take over the whole company. Drop your theories. Is the old man a hero or a new villain? Smash that like button if Faith's fire-retardant twist was legendary. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell. You do not want to miss the explosive Part 4, the final inheritance. Your beginning is a story, but your truth is a revolution. Stay blessed, and we will see you in the next one.